One of my college students, who had been persistently harassed by her classmate, finally reached her breaking point and decided to confront him in a way that would make him regret his actions. However, her retaliation led to unexpected consequences, and the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Not only did the harasser attempt to get her expelled, but he also falsely accused me, her professor, of having an inappropriate relationship with her. This entire ordeal tested my integrity, my role as an educator, and my commitment to supporting my students. I'm a college professor who has seen many students come and go, each with their own set of challenges. But one student in particular, Courtney, stood out to me. She was quiet, shy, and one of the most diligent students in my class. However, she had become the target of unwanted attention from a classmate named Brian. Brian, a loud and often disruptive presence in the classroom, had taken an unhealthy interest in Courtney. He would sit next to her every day, despite her clear discomfort, and would often make inappropriate comments and jokes at her expense. His behavior escalated to the point where he made her cry by loudly joking that nerdy girls like her were the most freaky. It was clear to everyone in the class that his comments were not just jokes, they were a form of harassment. Courtney, who had always been polite and reserved, seemed to shrink more and more each day under Brian's relentless attention. She never fought back, never complained, and never even looked me in the eye when I asked her if everything was okay. I could tell something was wrong, but as her professor, I wasn't sure how to address it without making her feel even more uncomfortable. Then, one day, something changed. Courtney walked into class with a different expression on her face. Instead of her usual timid demeanor, she looked angry, furious, even. Brian, oblivious as always, slid into the seat next to her and began his usual routine of annoying banter. But this time, instead of shrinking away, Courtney snapped. She loudly told him to shut up, which caused the entire class to fall silent. Brian, clearly taken aback, tried to play it off by saying something sleazy about how he was good at taming naughty girls. What happened next shocked everyone, including myself. Without missing a beat, Courtney grabbed the 450-page hardback book she had on her desk, lifted it over her head, and slammed it down on Brian's head twice. The force of the blow made Brian's nose gush blood, and he quickly fled the classroom, holding his face. The room was dead silent as everyone processed what had just happened. I ended the lecture early, more out of concern for Courtney than anything else. I asked her to stay behind, and as the last of the students filed out, she started shaking uncontrollably. I could see that she was in no condition to talk, but I knew I needed to understand her side of the story. When she finally began to speak, her voice was filled with pain and frustration. She told me that Brian had been making her life a living nightmare for weeks. Not only had he been harassing her in class, but he had also been sending her disgusting text messages. She showed me the texts, which were vile and explicit. Brian had been using different numbers to contact her after she blocked him, and he had even sent her explicit photos, though he had carefully cut out his face in all of them. I was horrified by what I saw. This was not just harassment, it was a form of psychological torture. I told Courtney that I would support her, but she needed to gather all the evidence she had so that we could report him properly. She agreed and thanked me repeatedly for believing her. Over the next few days, as Courtney prepared to report Brian, the situation took a dramatic turn. Before she could file her complaint, Brian went to the administration and reported her for violence, claiming that she had attacked him without provocation, causing his nose to bleed and giving him a concussion. He even claimed that her actions could have caused brain damage and that he might not be able to complete his classes for the semester because of her. The administration, upon hearing his version of events, began to consider expelling Courtney. Courtney was devastated. She tried to explain her side of the story, but it seemed like the school authorities were more inclined to believe Brian. After all, he was the one with the visible injuries, and they didn't yet know the full extent of what Courtney had been enduring. I knew I couldn't let this happen. I took all the evidence that Courtney had gathered, the disturbing texts, the explicit photos, and the detailed account of what had been happening, and I went to the administration myself. As I presented the evidence, I could see the expressions on their faces change. They were shocked, but also concerned about the implications of what I was showing them. Just as it seemed like things might start to turn in Courtney's favor, another problem arose. An anonymous report was submitted to the school, accusing me of having an inappropriate relationship with Courtney. My heart sank as I realized that this baseless accusation could not only end my career but also undermine Courtney's claims entirely. The school immediately put me on temporary leave while they investigated the allegations. I was devastated, not just for myself but for Courtney as well. This accusation threatened to undo everything we had worked for. I knew I had to prove my innocence, but the investigation process was grueling. Over the next few weeks, my life became a series of meetings with investigators. I had to hand over my emails, phone records, and any other communication that could help clear my name. Breaking the news to my wife was the hardest part. She knew me better than anyone, and she didn't doubt my innocence for a second, but the strain it put on our relationship was undeniable. The investigators combed through every piece of communication I had ever had with Courtney, looking for anything that could be construed as inappropriate. They pointed to an email thread where I had responded to Courtney's questions about a project. In one of her emails, she had joked that she didn't want to end up like another student, Eric, who had been disruptive and eventually had to be withdrawn from my class. I had responded by reassuring her that she was one of my best students and that she would never be treated like Eric. The investigators claimed that my tone in the email could be interpreted as flirtatious and that I was speaking negatively about a former student. I explained that I was not flirting with Courtney, I was simply encouraging her as I would with any student who was doing well in my class. I even provided emails where I had made similar comments to other students, both male and female, to show that I treated all my students the same way. My wife, who had been helping me compile this evidence, found another email where I had joked with a male student in his 40s, saying that if he kept presenting so well, I might have to hire him as my assistant. The investigators reviewed the thread but said it didn't prove anything about my interactions with Courtney. It felt like no matter what I showed them, they were determined to find something incriminating. My frustration grew as I realized how easily a baseless accusation could destroy everything I had worked for. Finally, after weeks of stress and uncertainty, the investigators agreed to review the additional context I had provided. They eventually concluded that my interactions with Courtney were indeed professional and consistent with how I communicated with all my students. I was cleared of the allegations, but the experience left me shaken. I knew I had to continue supporting Courtney, who was still facing the threat of expulsion. Courtney, despite everything she had been through, remained strong. She continued to gather evidence against Brian, including witness statements from other students who had seen how he treated her in class. Some of her classmates even admitted that they had felt uncomfortable around Brian themselves, and that they had seen how badly he was treating Courtney. One student even went so far as to say that if Courtney were expelled, he and his friends would boycott the university. Courtney kept meticulous records of everything, and her determination to see justice served only grew stronger. Finally, she came to my office one afternoon with a folder full of documents and her phone in hand. She told me that she thought she had enough proof to clear her name and explain her actions to the investigators. As I looked through the evidence, I found something that solidified her case completely. In one of the explicit pictures that Brian had sent her, I noticed a small birthmark on his right hand. I told Courtney that if we could prove that he had that exact same birthmark in person, the investigators would have to listen to her. We went to the dean's office together, where Courtney handed over the folder of evidence to the investigation team. Inside were screenshots of all the messages Brian had sent her, both from his number and the numbers he used through anonymous apps. She also had written statements from her classmates, corroborating her story and detailing how uncomfortable Brian's behavior had made them feel. She highlighted key messages that showed how Brian's harassment had escalated over time, from inappropriate comments to explicit texts. Courtney also showed the investigators the video that her friend had recorded of Brian following her around campus. In the video, it was clear that Brian was trying to get close to her without being noticed. The room was silent as the video played, and it was unmistakable Brian was stalking Courtney. When the video ended, one of the investigators finally spoke, saying that it was compelling evidence and that it was clear Courtney had acted in self-defense. The dean nodded in agreement, though she did note that Courtney's response in hitting Brian was extreme, albeit justified. I could see the tension in Courtney's shoulders begin to ease as the weight of weeks of anxiety started to lift. Tears filled her eyes as she thanked the investigators for hearing her out, and she looked over at me with a mix of relief and gratitude. The administration made their decision. Brian would be placed under strict watch, prohibited from any contact with Courtney, and required to attend counseling sessions. Courtney, on the other hand, was cleared of any wrongdoing, and measures were put in place to ensure her safety on campus. As we left the dean's office, Courtney thanked me profusely, saying she couldn't have done it without my help. I told her that she had worked hard and that now it was paying off. She nodded, clearly relieved, but I could tell that the ordeal had taken a toll on her. The experience had left a lasting impact on both of us. Courtney slowly began to regain her confidence, and I gained a renewed sense of purpose in my role as an educator. I realized that my responsibility wasn't just to impart knowledge but also to protect and support my students in every way I could. When the semester finally came to an end, I wasn't surprised to see Courtney's name at the top of the class. she had not only survived the ordeal but had also excelled academically. On the last day of the semester, I handed back the graded exams, and when I gave Courtney her paper, she breathed a sigh of relief she had passed with an A. The entire experience had been grueling, but Courtney had proven her strength and resilience. As her professor, I felt honored to have stood by her side through it all. My return to the classroom was met with warm smiles and relieved faces. The students had heard about what had happened, and they were glad to see me back. Courtney and I maintained a cordial relationship, keeping our interactions strictly professional. Despite the challenges we had faced, I was pleased to have supported a student in need and to have cleared my name. Weeks later, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for Courtney's courage, for my wife's unwavering support, and for the opportunity to continue doing what I love, teaching and guiding the next generation of students.